Hi everyone, this is Kerim Baran with SolarAcademy. I am here today with Marc Palmer of Conductor Solar. Marc is one of those rare entrepreneurs that is taking on the challenge of community solar in the U.S. market. I've gotten to know Marc over the past year, and we've had some really interesting conversations about the community solar market, and we figured it would be a good idea to share it publicly on SolarAcademy. Marc, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kerim. Yeah, rare or crazy, whatever you want to call it. It's a fun market. It's pretty neat how you can take, these kind of middle-sized solar projects and, let all these different homeowners and businesses who aren't able to get solar, on their roof or in their backyard and to be able to benefit from solar power and support it. So it's a neat program, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's very state specific. So it's nuanced and excited to explore the market a little bit more today.
Great. But before we get in there, I would like to ask you a little bit about yourself, your background, so people get a little acquainted with you. Can you tell us how you found yourself in the community solar business? How you before you started Conductor Solar, what were you doing in life and in professional career, and how you ended up creating Conductor Solar?
Yeah, happy to touch on that briefly. I am an engineering major by trade. So I've always had kind of like the math and numbers focus. Chemical engineering though, and I never did anything with it in the chemical engineering space. Made a concentrated effort after a few years doing management consulting to get into the renewable energy industry, and started my career working on the financing side for really large scale projects. I worked for Invenergy for a number of years. Invenergy is the largest privately held power company, I think, in the world, and it's a majorly focused on wind and solar projects, as well as some natural gas. Cut my teeth financing really large scale projects and did a lot of solar financing with them, learning about debt and tax equity and all these different investment structures. And that was great, but I was excited to work on a little bit of the smaller, kind of more local feel. And so I jumped into the middle market, really focusing on C&I. Community solar was still pretty nascent back then in 2017, and spent a couple of years with a company called New Resource Solutions, working on the middle market and solving financing challenges for the middle market. You'll see a theme here. That's a lot what Conductor does as well.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time in that world, focusing on really consulting and brokerage for mainly C&I projects and a little bit community solar, taking a lot of the expertise and foundation I had on financing for really large projects with a whole team and army of people, to now these smaller projects that have a lot of people who can run a business and build a solar project but don't really know anything about financing, working with people who don't really know a lot about building a solar project, and trying to help bridge some of the just conversational gaps and issues that exist. And that really led to Conductor Solar, which is a better way to do that. It's a marketplace built for people in the middle market, so C&I and communities and community solar, really project sizes everywhere as small as 20, 30, 40 kW up to 10 megawatts or so. A platform to help these parties find each other in a really targeted way, to actually transact in a more standardized manner, and to have tools to collaborate with all these details that make project financing and selling and buying projects really hard. And taking a lot of our expertise to just do it better for the whole market. And so we're not a developer, we're not a financer, but we have a lot of expertise on both sides. So to answer your question about the community solar aspect, that's been a growing market, and it's been an increasing need that we've seen, as so many markets are different across the country. There's about 15 of them that are active in community solar, and we can go more into that in a little bit. But we've basically gotten pulled into community solar from different solar developers across the country who need help and support, or want somebody to assist them in finding a really quality partner to ultimately develop and finance and own and operate these projects.
Got it. So you've been in this mid-market C&I and community solar segment for a while now. We can probably several years. what can you tell us about how that market is evolving, and specifically community solar, but maybe in relation to other segments of mid-market solar as well? I mean, obviously, utility scale solar is probably still 2/3 plus of the US market, probably worldwide too, I would say. But you and I are both believers in truly distributed energy, and that we will perhaps see the long tail end of that market take off one day and be as big as the utility market, or bigger perhaps. So is that happening? What does that other third of the market look like today, and what are some trends that you're observing?
Yeah, when I think about the solar industry, especially in the US, there's utility scale, and that's the largest. There's residential, which is also pretty comparable by dollars, or at least used to be. It's been pulling back, and
Dollar
utility's been
wise, yeah.
taking the lead, yeah, by dollar wise. And then you've
Because
got the
it's
middle market.
3 to 4 times more expensive.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is what, yeah.
And then you've got the middle market, which is
right.
C&I and Community Solar, both of which are a lot smaller. So there's about $8 billion last year in C&I and Community Solar projects that got built across the US.
$8 billion. Okay, so that's what is that, like 5-6 gigawatts or more, or what's the average?
Probably more like 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
Yeah,
It's
something
still
about that.
averaging like $2 a watt, kind of.
Yeah, and you've got community solar. I estimate that to be about 3 billion of that 8, and C&I to be about 5. And of community solar, I think there's 1.25 gigawatts last year, but a lot of these projects are like 2, 3, maybe even more dollars per watt. They're usually a little higher on the build cost than the C&I side.
And how big are they, generally speaking?
Yeah, it all depends on the market. Some markets are smaller for community solar, and so like Vermont's kind of a nuance for a community solar market. It usually subscribes a couple businesses, and they cap out at I think it's 500 kW AC. And then
like the cap. Wow,
that's the cap. Yeah, so like 750 DC is kind of the standard project in Vermont. And then like Minnesota, I think, has a 1 megawatt cap. So those are on the smaller end, and then you have some of the markets that are generally larger by volume that are really doing most of the activity in the community solar, at least by dollars, like New York. A lot of those projects are 6-7 megawatts. Illinois as well, kind of in the same range. Typically, it's like a 5 megawatt AC cap, and then they load them up to be about 1.5x for DC.
And what does that project have to have in terms of attributes to qualify as a community solar project versus a 5 megawatt utility scale project?
Yeah, so let's start with what does community solar mean?
Right.
It's really a formal program that's done typically by the state, where multiple residential or non-residential customers can basically effectively buy a portion of the power produced by a larger site. And so the benefits are you're able to get scale. And so instead of you and I putting a bunch of 5, 10, 20 kilowatt projects on our house and paying $4 a watt, $5 a watt, you can do a 5 megawatt project and subscribe 200 of those people to that for $2 a watt or $1.50 a watt.
Yeah.
And so
although they're subscribing to the kilowatt hours, the kWhs that flow out of that project, probably for a period of multiple years, or they commit for a year or more, probably at a time.
It depends on the program, and if it's a corporate versus a residential, and some programs have constraints on this, but generally they sign up for so many kilowatt hours or kilowatts, that'll generate production, and they'll get it at some discount, typically 10 to 20% off of their rate they would otherwise pay. And so their benefit is they get a support solar energy. They don't have to necessarily put it on their roof or in their backyard, and they get a discount on their power bill. And then they typically will subscribe for, it's usually in perpetuity, and they can opt out whenever they want.
Yeah.
Some of the businesses, some of the contracts they'll have some penalties depending on how much of an anchor they are and how big of a
Hmm.
discount they're getting. But that depends on the state a little bit. So
Got
it
it.
can be a 5-year term and then, an evergreen 1-year renewals, or there's a couple different ways that can be structured.
And how many such programs are there? I mean, they're all unique programs from state to state. Perhaps within a state, they're from utility company to utility company. There are different variations too. I don't know if that's the case, but how many different programs or markets are there? And what's the driving force behind them and how is that whole um, landscape evolving
I think
in the
there are
US market?
Yeah, I think there are 15 markets, states that support community solar.
Mhm.
And you're right, some of them, usually there's some level that's tied to the utility area. So, a typical requirement is you need to subscribe customers that are within the same utility zone. Um, but typically it's across the state that supports community solar. Um, you generally we're seeing the trends, that oftentimes they tend to be more left-leaning states, kind of the bluer states, but not always. So I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio is where I
Mhm.
live, and Ohio's been talking about community solar for a while. It's one of those markets that everyone has
Mhm.
been on the horizon for a while. Ohio's pretty firmly a red state, especially as of
Yeah.
late. But Ohio has bipartisan support for community solar. There's,
Yeah.
not everybody supports it, but generally because it's a great way for farmers and people with a lot of land, flat land, to monetize it and get more for it than they could
Yeah.
from just, simply farming the land. So, some of the states on the horizon that are
Mhm.
maybe up next. You've got Pennsylvania and Ohio that have kind of been sitting there for a while that have people keep hoping will be one of the next ones to fall.
Yeah.
Michigan seems to be getting some nice momentum. Wisconsin, so like some of the other Midwestern states
Got it.
seem to be ones that could be up and
And what are
coming.
some of the other like strong states that have been traditionally really into community solar and have been strong markets for it?
Yeah, some of the earlier
Yeah.
ones, like Minnesota was one of the earlier ones, and I think they've got close to a gigawatt of community solar projects that are installed
Wow.
now, and they're like 1 megawatts at a time, so
Wow.
smaller. And they've had, it's even been kind of constraining in terms of like what the subscription requirements are. I think historically it used to be, um, you can subscribe in that county that the project is in or a adjacent county, but
Mhm.
nothing else. And
Right.
so now I think Minnesota just changed it. So if you're in the same utility, if you're in Excel territory, for example,
Yeah.
you can subscribe. So Minnesota is like one of the earlier ones, and they've been pretty steady. Um, Today, I mean, I think SIA puts out some pretty good data on SIA and Wood Mackenzie on
Mhm.
the community solar market, and I think they estimate like 45% of the community solar in the U.S. is in New York.
Wow.
And I imagine there's a pretty good chunk in Illinois as well. I think those are
Mhm.
probably the two largest markets.
Mhm.
New York's been declining a little bit. We can go into like some of the challenges of community solar in a
Mhm.
second, but those are some of the bigger states that are out there. So New York and Illinois, and then some of the growing states are like New Jersey and Maryland. So Maryland had
Mhm.
this long pilot program for a number of years, and just last year they passed a program to make that permanent. And so there's been a lot of activity and
Mhm.
growth in the Maryland market, but it's still nowhere near as big as New York, for example, where there's a
Got it.
ton of good land, across the state.
Any markets on the west side of the country?
Well, we almost had California.
Yeah.
They passed some legislation, and I guess the CPUC just kind of came down claiming it was in violation of the consumer's best interest or something. So I think California Community Solar, people started putting investing hard dollars on developing projects and getting land and
Mhm.
all that, and I think they're kind of a false start. It seems like it might be killed all together. So it's California. Oregon, I think, has had a bit of a market. I'm not real
Mhm.
familiar with up there.
Mhm.
New Mexico actually has just started some community solar. I think last year and this year are kind of the first years that they're getting going to
Mhm.
get like 100 megawatts a year.
And how about Colorado? I think they've had some activity there as well.
Yeah, I think Colorado is one of the earlier ones.
Yeah,
I don't think of them as a big state. I'm not too familiar with that market, to be honest.
yeah.
I think I think it was more popular, and I'm not real, can't give you a lot of specifics on that
Yeah.
program. Yeah.
And then what about Texas and Florida? What's is it happening there, or if not, why not?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any movement for Texas or Florida.
Just too
Texas is a
independent.
Texas is a weird state with some areas support solar and third party ownership and
Right.
some different options, but there's so many different like little utility zones, and ERCOT's a funky ISO, and then Florida is just, I mean, the utilities are heavily in the pockets, and they're at
Okay.
least, we're seeing a fair amount of solar in Florida.
Yeah.
We typically work on like PPAs and third party ownership, and so we Conductor solar doesn't see much, but Florida has a fair amount of solar going up on the residential and some on the commercial side.
Got it.
But too red of a state and too
Yeah.
controlled by the utilities. Like you think about the utilities and all of like these 5 megawatt solar arrays popping up around the state. Like you get a couple
Yeah.
of them, it's no big deal. But when you start having a lot of them and you have this
Yeah.
non-dispatchable resource, like they're just not used to that. And
Right.
so that leads to a trend you're starting to see with community solar is needing storage
Sure.
to help balance it out and provide some more flexibility for the grid.
And is that happening on site? Are you starting to see that? Is that
Yeah,
being
yeah,
developed in tandem with the solar array?
yeah. Massachusetts is a really good example. The SMART program, is just
Mm-hmm.
loaded with projects. It's been really slow lately because of the permitting and interconnection,
Mm-hmm.
some of the delays, and the program, as intended, the blocks have decreased, and there's a little less value there than there used to be. But now I think if for all pretty much all community solar projects in Massachusetts require storage to be paired with it.
Wow.
And they've got different incentives for it and different ways you can connect it. But um, you see a little activity. We're hearing a little activity of storage being paired with projects in New York because there's a little bit of incentive there. But um, I
Yeah.
think it's moving in that direction. But
Yeah.
there's still a lot of ways to go on the storage front.
So, what do you see as the hot trends, or like what seems to be working well and growing, and where do you see the opposite, like shrinking markets or maybe not so hot, um, besides the
Yeah, I
ones.
guess. Um, yeah. So the like the trends, I'd say some of the trends that we see are couple things. So one, on the program side, we're seeing more requirements and specificity for providing solar and benefits to low to moderate income areas and
Mm-hmm.
subscribers and residents. And so you're starting to see programs require certain amounts of the community solar project be subscribed by these LMI residents.
Communities. Yep.
Yep, communities. And you're also starting to see, and there's programs like Illinois has a whole, kind of separate program targeted for LMI communities. Um, and
And in most of these markets, the residents are getting a 5 to 10% discount to their electric bill, or more perhaps.
yeah, usually it's at least 10, could be more. For example, in Illinois, there's a community solar part of. So when you think about all of the different awards for projects,
Mm-hmm.
so everybody wants to get awards for Illinois Community Solar to get RECs, and so that way they can have some nice value on the project. There's different tiers, so they have most of the projects are in this traditional community solar bucket, and then there's a carve out for a certain number of projects that have more community driven benefits. And with those projects, for example, 20% of I think 20% of the subscribers need to be LMI related, and they need to be given at least a 20% discount to their power. And so
Got
typical
it.
discounts are more like 10.
Yeah,
And so
makes sense.
they get a little bit more of a benefit as
Got it.
well. So other trends that we're seeing, starting to see, these markets that are more saturated, like New York, like Massachusetts, probably Illinois pretty soon. Interconnection timing and upgrade costs are just getting really, really large and long,
Yeah.
and being hard for the projects. The permitting seems to be getting harder and longer as well.
Yeah.
And all of that just makes it a little harder to, it's a longer time horizon. You're talking
Yeah.
about, some real dollars that go into developing these projects, and it's hard to wait
That
two
long.
years. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
we've talked about some projects that are thinking about putting a couple projects together to justify, larger upgrade costs. But the timing on that can be like 2, 3, 4 years before those
Wow.
upgrades get completed.
Yeah. The whole it seems like the whole grid in the US is going to be so overloaded with so much extra capacity coming online. And I think it was Elon Musk interview that I saw recently where he was talking about where transistors and transformers are going to be the bottleneck in the growth of energy in the US, unless we start putting batteries right on site at the point of consumption, which is not happening fast enough, and the batteries are still not cheap enough for that to happen for most people, but or for most
Yeah,
applications, I would say. But
I
it's gonna
I mean,
eventually have to happen.
the grid is the grid's a mess.
Yeah,
There's a lot of innovation and support that needs to go into that over time, especially as this transition to more renewable resources is underway, and
yeah,
batteries are a piece of the puzzle, but they're not the only solution. And so figuring out ways to help support the grid and the interconnection process, and some of the really important equipment like a transformer, getting those more regularly available and quicker turnaround are all super important.
yeah. So, what other challenges and solutions are you seeing and wanting to talk about in this conversation in solving the growth of this mid-market C&I community solar segment, which seems to be trailing vis-a-vis the utility and the residential market. So what needs to change for that segment to grow faster?
Yeah,
And it is still growing, but
it's still growing. I mean, we think we really expect the market to double once, if not twice, in the next probably not even 10 years. So we think there's a lot of growth to be had by the middle market, the C&I and community solar market. One just anecdote I'll share, that doesn't directly answer your question yet. We, through working with a lot of C&I installers and developers, there's not a ton of overlap in people who are doing a lot of C&I projects
yeah,
and ones who are doing community solar. There's some, but there's a lot of overlap in C&I installers with residential installers.
yeah.
And we're hearing that the shift of their, the revenues they bring in from, the last couple of years to like this year used to be 50-50 or 60-40 slanting on the residential side. And now like it's, 80-20 commercial, 90-10 commercial,
Wow.
just focusing a lot more on the commercial side.
And these are
Because
markets outside of California. I know if you said that was California, I would understand because
yeah,
things are changing quite rapidly with net metering 3.0 in California. But wow, also outside of California, you're seeing that, huh?
yeah, I mean, we're hearing it anecdotally. We don't,
Yeah.
we don't see their books, but
Yeah.
yeah, we're hearing a lot of people coming to us saying, hey, we're looking to shift more into the C&I market. Obviously, there's still a ton of really strong resi, developers, installers out there, but
Yeah.
that seems to be a trend.
Yeah.
So one of the barriers to growth, and just I guess one of the things that we really focus on to talk about, is the challenge of developing and financing community solar projects is hard. It takes a certain skill set. It takes a lot of expertise. It takes patience and thick skin because, as I'm sure you can attest to, I know of a lot of projects that took longer and cost more than expected. I don't know too many projects that came in quicker and were cheaper than expected.
That's the
Um,
nature of developing anything, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to have thick skin. But thinking about some of these larger community solar projects, it can be, it can take $200,000, not even including interconnection costs, just to get a project ready to construct.
Yeah.
Going through an interconnection process, getting the site control, dealing with some legal, some permitting, some environmental stuff, a lot of engineering. So it can be really expensive.
Yeah.
And what we come across is a lot of needs for support in that $200,000, either getting it ready to construct, or then once it's permitted and ready to start construction, finding a financial partner to fund and own and operate that. And I think what we found is that it really is so important to be clear on the roles and responsibilities of the different parties. And so if somebody's looking for a financial partner, are they looking for just a financial partner, or do they also want their expertise in development and legal and engineering, or none of the above?
Right.
And everybody wants a different flavor of it. So teasing out those details is really important, and doing that in a way that helps you compare your options in a more apples to apples way is, I think, really important. Those industries had trouble doing, because at least one of my favorite topics, and we wrote a blog post on this a year or so ago. We've realized that across the country, everyone speaks a different dialect of solar. The resi people, the C&I people, the community solar people, they all have different dialects. And then the California ones, the people doing small projects, large projects, Midwest. Anyways, there's like all these things that you can say. We heard somebody today mention, they were just talking about their solar project, and they were saying, we got NTP from the utility. And when I hear that, like, I think, okay, great, like, notice procedure, fully developed, permitted, all this stuff, and just
Yeah.
wasn't the way they thought about things. And they explained it, and they were actually closer to where my head was at than not. But it goes to say, like, they could say that, I could hear it, and I think, great, the project's ready to go. And they're like, well, no, I'm just talking about this one piece. And we see that
Right.
all the time. And there's like, we're not going to be Rosetta Stone for mid-market solar, but there's, I mean, that causes so much friction and experiences, right? Like, if your experience has been working on small cash deals, and all of a sudden you get this like small 100 kW cash deals, and you get this 1 megawatt community solar opportunity, like, you're working with a totally different counterparty and financing, and the depth of it and heft of it is so different from what you're used to.
Yeah.
Anyways, like
So
I'm
what
going.
you're saying is you're wishing that there was some standard way of doing these projects, perhaps.
That's why we're
Or
here. That's why we're here,
yeah,
Kerim. Yeah,
the
much more standardized way to solve a
Airbnb
lot of
way of
that.
renting a home, or Airbnb way of developing solar projects for the mid market.
That's right. Like, do you need to know if there's a shower or bath in the bathtubs? Like, maybe you got a little kid and you need a
Yeah,
bathtub, but it's not necessarily clear. And so anyway, just getting like those details sometimes matter. And like,
sure.
do you require, like, oftentimes what we see in this market is someone's like, hey, we'll pay you $2.50 a watt for this project. Great. And then like, let's go, let's lock together. Let's plan to work on this over the next 60 days. Let's close it. You find out, like, all right, and we need bonding, and you actually need these monitors and not those. And your engineering standards, this 5-page stamp package doesn't work. We need 40. And we're going to want you to check in like every 2 days on like how the construction's going. And you may not, like, I don't know if you have an administrative capacity for that, but we need that. And all these things, and then like that 250 becomes like effectively like
Or
225, and it's just super
yeah,
it's tough. Yeah.
yeah, I get it. Yeah, I wish there was one platform that standardized all of this.
We're getting there. We're getting
Yeah,
there. We're
you're working
slowly
on
but
that.
surely. Yeah, there's
Got it.
you can't just all of a sudden make it appear,
Yeah,
because you're gonna, I mean, you learn a ton along the way and continue to
yeah.
refine a little bit here and there. And anyways, we're having fun. We're having fun building it and working on that.
Great. Well, what else can we talk about this community solar market as we conclude this conversation? What would you like to cover additional
Um,
points?
yeah, I'll touch just a couple points about the state of the market and kind of what we're seeing.
Hmm.
We work with in solar IPP, independent power producers, people who own and operate these community solar projects across the country. Sometimes they develop them as well, but oftentimes we're involved. They're acquiring them from a solar developer, and I think
How
it's
many
really
such companies are there in the US, would you say?
that's a good question.
Like
There's
that own and operate
probably
community solar assets, the IPPs.
yeah, maybe I don't know, maybe like somewhere around 50. I'd
Any of
say.
them, any big names that are public companies or public, big acquirers?
I'm trying like there's trying to think of like some of the bigger names that are out there. There's a number of them that are backed by like really big companies, Blackstone or Ares or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can think of like Brookfield has, I think, two actually, Standard Solar and Luminace.
Mm-hmm.
There's a company called Nautilus that is really solely focused on community solar. Summit Ridge Energy has been a big, really big, fast growing player in the space. Those are just some of the names. Cypress
Yeah.
Creek is kind of like almost like an OG community solar
Mm-hmm.
developer because they were doing all these similarly sized projects, but more in like like some sort of tariff environment opposed to
Mm-hmm.
community solar environment, but the same size project.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, just a sample of
Yeah,
some of the
those are
ones
some
out
of the
there.
buyers.
Yeah.
Anyway, please continue. I cut you off, but you were saying.
So, they're across the country, and it's really interesting from our perspective, seeing them go hot and cold in a market in a given year, or even within a year, like really hungry for projects and have a really aggressive pricing and view in the first half of the year, and then all of a sudden it changes, fairly dramatically. Their pricing for a similar project is 10% lower. And I just find that really interesting. And I think it makes sense, right? Like they're hungry. They've got so many megawatts they need to get under commitment and want to start building. And, to some extent, they become aggressive because they need to get better pricing with more scale and things like that. But it's just really interesting from our view to see, it just changes so rapidly for different reasons. So that's fun for us to see and always interesting. We're always learning it. And sometimes we think partners can be great for this project in a given market. And they're like, actually, we're not in this market anymore. And I'm like, oh, well, 2 months ago, like you were really active and excited about it. And that doesn't happen too often, but anyways, everybody sees that happen here and there.
So I have one more last question, Mark. What we talked a little bit about this shifting dynamic of a lot of the long tail EPCs, developer and installers focusing on 50-50 resi and C&I, perhaps shifting a little bit more towards 80-20 mix of higher C&I and perhaps community solar type projects in their portfolio mix. So what would be your advice to those EPCs and installers and developers starting to focus from the small resi type projects to more larger C&I and community solar market?
Yeah, it's a very doable jump, but it's not necessarily easy because the institutional rigor that supports some of the best pricing and players who are in this C&I and community solar market typically comes with banks and tax equity and people that have a lot of specific requirements to de-risk the project because they've been burned by something in the past. And so I think it's really just getting a handle and making sure you understand what you're jumping into. If you've done some, C&I PPAs with some of the more professional investors out there, not like you've got some doctor friends who you've convinced to own the project and set up the PPA, but really like somebody who buys and owns and operates projects for a living. I think if you haven't done that, it's another animal. It just requires more rigor. So I think it's getting a sense of how much you're going to have to spend at risk to get the project to the right place for them to want to come in and start funding it. And what are some of those requirements?
I assume that means a lot of documentation, a lot of tight processes, and providing lots of paperwork, pictures, documenting your development process for the benefit of the investor, and perhaps some other to-dos post development, maintenance work, and so on and so forth. Is that kind of the way to describe this, or what else?
Yeah.
What's unique about that animal that a smaller residential installer developer would not be familiar with?
I think to like at the basic level, I think this should resonate well with most people. Most small kind of C&I and residential developers are used to having someone else pay for the interconnection application and process. Just like there. If you're doing kind of this community solar or sometimes larger C&I projects, you need to fund that yourself, and it can be a much more substantial check to write. And if it comes back really badly, that's money that's just gone. And that's like a different risk profile than they're used to taking. So we've worked with a number of EPCs who build for 4 or 5 megawatt sites, but just for people who are paying cash for it, and now they want to do a PPA, and they're just not used to having to do some of these things on their own dime. And then the requirements tend to be more onerous. So thinking about a rooftop project, still not that big or that expensive, but you want to make sure your site lease, if you're doing a community solar project, is good, and that you've got a good legal representation there, and it's done in a way that's consistent with solar project financing. You need to typically get like some sort of boundary survey and understand the title and who owns it, and some of those things. If you're doing a ground mount project, it's a lot more. It can be things that you've never had to do before, because these ultimately the banks who you never talk to require a phase 1 environmental site assessment, wetlands delineation, environmental studies, and all these things that can add 20 to 50K onto the project, and doing that all at risk again, where if it comes back negatively and it kills the project, like nobody else put that money in. And that's something that most people aren't used to. And now there's solutions for it, right? There are these long-term owner operators who will fund and support some of those development costs, maybe not all of them, but some of them. And as long as you're clear about roles and responsibilities and who funds what when, you can find the right partner to do that with you and help you grow to that next level, maybe for a couple projects, and then you can go off and do it on your own. So that's probably the recommendation that I'd conclude with is, there's doing it with a party that can support you as you are growing to that next level, and help you know what potholes are in front of you, can be really helpful and worth, you give up some upside, but worth it for a little peace of mind, and that, or hire a super expensive, experienced community solar developer, could work too. Got
it. Well, thank you very much, Marc. For the viewers, it's been great. Someone who's played with the best and the biggest solar developers at the utility scale market, now focusing on the mid-market and sharing all his wisdom and experience with those helping grow the mid-market for solar, the C&I and community solar segments. Thank you so much.
Mid-market's where it's at, Kerim.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. A lot of fun just talking back and forth with you on some of these things.
Yeah, we'll probably do a future segment on the other attributes of and challenges and potentials of the community solar market and beyond. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks.
All right.